My mother announced it like she was reading the weather forecast. Same flat voice, same eyes that looked past you, same complete absence of awareness that anything she was saying might land like a fist. "The party is for the grandchildren," she said. That was it. 6 words. And she reached for her wine glass like the sentence weighed nothing at all. Lily was sitting 2 chairs down from her. She was 6 years old and wearing the yellow sweater with the white buttons, the one she had picked out herself that morning because she said it looked fancy. Her hands were folded in her lap, the way she did them when she was working very hard at being very good. She heard every word. I watched her face do that thing it had started doing at family gatherings, a small, almost invisible rearrangement, like furniture being quietly pushed against the walls to make room for something cold to come through. She didn't cry. She didn't ask why. She picked up her fork and looked at her plate, and the table moved on around her like she hadn't just been erased from something she hadn't even known she was hoping for. Marcus, my brother, reached for the bread basket. His wife Sandra refilled her water glass. My father, the man I had called Dad my whole life, the man with the gray beard and the reading glasses always pushed up on his forehead, looked at the centerpiece candle like it was the most interesting object in the room. Nobody said a word. Not one word. The silence was the kind that has been practiced so many times, it no longer feels like silence. It just feels like dinner. I kept my face exactly where it was. I have had a lot of practice at that too. 2 weeks later, on the morning of my parents' anniversary party, the one my mother had been planning for months, the one she had reminded us about 4 separate times, I handed her an envelope. She opened it in front of everyone. She went very still. The color left her face starting at her forehead and moving down, and she put one hand flat on the kitchen counter like she needed it to stay standing. My father looked at her face, and then at the envelope, and then he didn't look at anything for a long time. What was in that envelope? I'll get to that. Stay with me. Let me tell you about the family I grew up in first, because none of what I did makes sense without understanding what I was living inside. A system so well constructed, so perfectly normalized, that for most of my life I couldn't even see the walls. You can't see the shape of something when you've been inside it since before you could talk. My parents, Diane and Robert, my mother and the man who raised me as his daughter, live in Claremont, a small town in central Ohio where everyone knows everyone, and family reputation means something real and inconvenient. Their house is a white colonial on Birchwood Avenue with a navy blue door and a porch. My mother has been repainting different shades of sage green for as long as I can remember. The kitchen has yellow curtains. The dining room table is long and dark and has 8 chairs, even though there are rarely more than 6 people eating at it. The living room has a wall of framed photos. Marcus at his college graduation, Marcus and Sandra's wedding, Marcus's kids, Tyler, age 9, and Emma, age 7. At the beach, at Christmas, at every birthday in every season. There are 2 photos of me on that wall. One from when I was an infant. One from my own wedding, 8 years ago, the day I became Amanda Carver in the registry. When I married Daniel, who was the first person in my adult life who looked at me and didn't seem to be calculating what I cost. Daniel is the kind of man who says what he means, and means what he says and doesn't see why this should be considered unusual. He's a contractor, works with his hands, comes home with sawdust on his clothes, and a directness that used to unsettle my family because they couldn't quite figure out how to get around it. When my mother would say something at dinner that was designed to land softly but cut deeply, the kind of sentence that sounds like an observation but functions like a verdict, Daniel would look at her and say, "I'm not sure what you mean by that, Diane. Can you say it more plainly?" She never could. He knew that. That was exactly why he asked. Lily is our daughter, and she is the reason for everything I'm about to tell you. She has Daniel's dark eyes and my tendency to notice things before saying anything about them. She is quiet in the way that means she is paying close attention, not in the way that means she has nothing to say. By the time she was 5, she had already figured out, without anyone explaining it to her, that the rules at Grandma and Grandpa's house were different for her than they were for Tyler and Emma. She just hadn't decided yet what to do with that information. Neither had I. We were both still in the phase of hoping we were wrong. We weren't wrong. Marcus is 3 years older than me, and he is exactly the kind of person the family system was built to protect. I say that without malice. He didn't build it. He was just the one it organized itself around. He's an accountant, lives 12 minutes from my parents, and has dinner there every Sunday with Sandra and the kids. He's not a cruel person. He's not even particularly thoughtless. He just accepted the way things worked so early and so completely that questioning it has never once seemed necessary. Sandra is pleasant and a little nervous and has a talent for changing the subject at exactly the right moment, which I used to think was social grace and later understood was survival strategy. The kids, Tyler and Emma, are just children. They didn't ask for any of this either. And then there is my father, Robert. The man with the gray beard and the reading glasses, and the very long history of looking at the centerpiece candle. I want you to understand something about him before we go any further. I loved him. I still do, in the complicated way you love someone who failed you quietly for decades without ever once raising his voice. He never hit anyone. He never said anything explicitly cruel. He just looked away, consistently, reliably. In every single moment that required him to look directly at something uncomfortable, he looked away. It was his defining characteristic, and for a long time I thought it was a personality trait. Some people are just conflict-averse, I told myself. Some people just don't like scenes. It was only much later that I understood it wasn't just his nature, it was a choice. Repeated so many times, it had calcified into something that looked like nature, but wasn't. If you've ever sat at a table where something wrong was happening and watched every adult in the room decide, one by one, not to see it, you know exactly how my daughter felt in that yellow sweater with the white buttons. If you've ever been that child, the one who gets less, who gets overlooked, who learns early to fold their hands in their lap and look at their plate and wait for the moment to pass, then I made this for you. Stick around, because what I did next is something I thought about for a long time, and I want you to hear all of it. If this is your story too, hit subscribe right now. The next chapter is the one my mother least expected, and you need to be here for it. If you think what she said to my daughter was wrong, give this a like the moment you understand what was in that envelope. And tell me in the comments, has your family ever made a child feel invisible? I want to read every single one of those stories. You are not alone in this. Now, let me take you back further, because what happened at that dinner table was not the beginning. It was just the day I finally stopped pretending I hadn't been counting. The rules in our family always sounded fair. My mother was very good at rules, at stating them plainly, at invoking them with the tired patience of someone who had explained the obvious too many times. Rules gave her cover. Rules made personal preferences sound like policy. The problem, which I only assembled slowly over years, the way you assemble a puzzle by finding edges first, was that the rules applied to me in ways they never quite applied to Marcus. And when I pointed this out, on the rare occasions I had the nerve, there was always a reason. A special circumstance. A different situation. An explanation that was just plausible enough that I couldn't prove it was a lie, but just implausible enough that I couldn't quite believe it was true. I was 8 when I first noticed. There was a rule about the birthday party games. Only children under 10 could play, because the older kids would have an unfair advantage and it would upset the younger ones. My mother announced this rule at my cousin Greg's 7th birthday, when his older sister Kayla, who was 9 and a half, tried to join the egg and spoon race. Kayla sat out. The rule was the rule. 2 years later, at Marcus's 12th birthday party, he organized a treasure hunt through the backyard. The clues were written in his handwriting. The prize was a $20 bill in a shoebox under the porch steps. I was 10. I asked if I could play. My mother said the treasure hunt was for the older kids. It was designed for 12 and up, she said, too complicated for younger children. I was 10. I pointed out that 2 of Marcus's friends playing were 11. She said that was different. I asked how. She said I would understand when I was older. I was 12 when the rules shifted again. By then, I had started writing things down. Not in a diary, just in the back of a school notebook. A private catalog of the moments that didn't add up. I didn't know why I was keeping track. I think some part of me already understood that the only defense against gaslighting is documentation, even before I had a word for either of those things. The pattern, when you laid it out, was not subtle. It just required someone to be willing to look at it directly, which most people in that family had decided not to do. Rules were invoked to exclude me and explained away to accommodate Marcus. My needs were described as manageable, a compliment delivered so consistently that it took me until my mid-20s to understand it was really a justification. You don't need as much, Amanda. You've always been so self-sufficient. You've always been the easy one. Said with a warmth that was real, said with a tenderness that I did not doubt, but functioning every single time as an excuse not to give me what they were giving my brother. Rules were her favorite tool. They looked fair from the outside. The problem was, they were mostly for me. Let me tell you about the gifts, because that is where the pattern becomes impossible to argue with. Not impossible for them. They argued with it anyway, every time I brought it up, with the practiced fluency of people who have been arguing the same case for decades, but impossible for anyone watching from the outside with clear eyes. Marcus turned 16 in March. My parents took 2 weeks off work, drove to a dealership in Columbus, and came home with a dark green Honda Civic with a red bow on the hood. I know the bow was red because my mother has a photo of it framed in the hallway. Marcus standing next to the car with his hands in his pockets and a grin that takes up his whole face, and my father's arm around his shoulder. It's a good photo. Marcus looks genuinely happy. My father looks proud. My mother is behind the camera. I turned 16 that August. My parents gave me a bus pass, the kind you load money onto, the rectangular plastic card that you tap on the reader when you get on. $60 loaded onto it, and a card that said, "Welcome to Independence, sweetheart," in my mother's handwriting, with a little drawing of a bus in the corner that she had clearly tried to make cute. When I asked, and I did ask quietly a week later, after I had processed the thing enough to ask without my voice shaking, my mother said the budget had been tighter that year. Marcus's car had been planned for a long time, she said, and besides, the bus would teach me responsibility. I would learn the city. It would make me more capable. She said this like she was giving me something. She said this like the bus pass was a gift of character building that the car could never have provided. I said, okay. I put the card in my wallet. I learned the bus routes. The following Christmas, Marcus received a $1,200 television for his college dorm room. I received a $100 gift card to a bookstore I liked, which I was genuinely glad to have. I want to be clear about that, because the story is not that my parents were cold, not that they never loved me, not that every single thing they ever gave me was withheld out of cruelty. The story is the distance between the things, the consistent, reliable, year-after-year distance between what Marcus received and what I received, each gap accompanied by an explanation that made just enough surface sense that refusing it felt like ingratitude. I kept that bus pass. I still have it in the top drawer of my desk in the house Daniel and I own together on Sycamore Street. I have not loaded money onto it in years. I keep it because it represents something, not the injustice of it, or not only that. It represents who I was, a 16-year-old girl who took the explanation and said okay and learned the bus routes and got up at 5:45 in the morning in January to stand at the stop on the corner of Maple and Vine and wait for a future that nobody was building for her, which meant she was going to have to build it herself. I keep it because that girl deserved better and knew it and kept going anyway. But the gifts were only the visible part. Let me tell you about the money, because the money is where the story becomes something I can no longer describe as family dynamics and have to start describing as a transaction. It started 8 years ago, the year Daniel and I got married and moved into a rental on the east side of town while we saved up to buy. Marcus and Sandra had just had Tyler, our first nephew, and they were in the middle of renovating the kitchen in the house my parents had helped them put a down payment on the year before. The renovation had gone over budget. Marcus called me on a Tuesday evening and said it was just a temporary thing, just until the next paycheck cleared, just $200 to cover the gap on the contractor's final invoice. I transferred the money that night. That was the beginning. I want to be honest about how it grew, because it didn't happen all at once and it never came with an announcement. It accumulated. There was the $200 for the contractor. Then there was $300 the following spring when Sandra's car needed a new alternator. Then there was the $500 contribution my mother asked for, not Marcus, my mother, to help cover the catering for Tyler's first birthday party because they had invited more people than planned and the budget was short. Then there was the mortgage payment 1 month when Marcus had a slow quarter at work and they needed the gap covered. That one was $950. Just this once, my mother said. You know how it is, Amanda. Family helps family. I didn't push back. I didn't ask questions. I told myself this was what families did. You helped when someone needed it, and someday they would help when you needed it. That is what I told myself for years. The transfers never became two-directional. They moved in one direction only every time, like a current that only flowed one way. By the time Lily was born, 3.5 years after that first $200, I had transferred a total of approximately $22,000 to my family, to Marcus and Sandra, to my parents directly for various family expenses, to a shared account my mother had set up for family celebrations that in practice meant Marcus's kids' birthday parties, the holiday dinners my mother organized, the vacation the family took one summer to Myrtle Beach that Daniel and I could not afford to join and helped subsidize anyway. $22,000 over 5 years. I know the number because I kept records. Not out of resentment. At the time, I kept them out of hope. I thought someday there would be an accounting, a recognition, a moment when someone would say, "Amanda has given a lot. We should think about that." That moment did not come. What came instead was Lily learning to fold her hands in her lap at dinner. She was 4 the first time I noticed her do it. We were at my parents' house for Easter, and my mother had set up an egg hunt in the backyard, the plastic eggs with candy and dollar coins inside, scattered in the flower beds and under the patio chairs. Tyler was 7, Emma was 5, Lily was 4. They should have been exactly even. They weren't. My mother had hidden 32 eggs for Tyler and Emma combined. I counted afterward, quietly, while clearing up. She had hidden 11 for Lily. I noticed because Lily noticed, and Lily tried not to let me see her notice, and that was the part that broke something in me. Not the 11 eggs, but the way my daughter was already, at 4 years old, practicing the art of not making a scene. She brought her small basket to me with her 11 eggs and said, "I got a lot, Mama," and smiled like she meant it, and I thought, she's protecting me. She's 6 years old and she's already decided that her disappointment is a problem she needs to solve so that I don't feel bad. By the time she was 6, by the time she was sitting at that table in the yellow sweater, listening to my mother explain that the party was for the grandchildren, meaning Tyler and Emma, meaning not her, she had been practicing that art for 2 full years. She had learned to hesitate before asking if she was invited. She had learned to frame her questions carefully, like someone approaching an animal that might bite. She had learned to accept the answers without arguing, not because she didn't understand that they were unfair, but because she had observed, correctly, that arguing changed nothing except the atmosphere. She did the saddest thing children do. She accepted. In the car on the way home from that dinner, she sat in the back seat very quietly for about 4 minutes. I could see her in the rearview mirror, looking out the window at the dark streets going by. Then she said, in that careful, measuring voice she used for questions she already half knew the answer to, "Mama, does Grandma love Tyler and Emma more than she loves me?" I pulled into a parking lot. I turned the car off. I turned around to look at her and I said, "Grandma has made some choices that have been unfair to you, and that is not okay. And it is not because of anything wrong with you. You are not loved less by me or by Daddy. And I am going to fix this." She looked at me for a long moment and said, "How?" I said, "I'm still working on that part." That night, after she was asleep, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop open to the banking app, and I looked at the list of recurring transfers, and I did something I had been not quite doing for 5 years. I calculated, not estimated, calculated, every transfer, every contribution, every shared account deposit, every emergency gap fill. The total across 8 years was $31,460. I sat with that number for a long time, and I started thinking about the envelope. I want to tell you something about how that decision felt, because people always assume that acting is the hard part. It isn't. The hard part is the years before. The hard part is the accumulation of dinners and bus passes and $40 birthday gifts, while your brother's kids get $400 presents, and the Easter egg hunts with 11 eggs, and watching your daughter learn to accept things before she has any reason to. The decision itself, when it finally came, felt like exhaling after years of held breath. It felt like the moment a fever breaks. Not comfortable exactly, but the beginning of something real. I want to explain the DNA test before I explain the envelope, because you need to understand the full picture. I had known. Not known, suspected, felt, filed in that notebook in the back of my mind where I kept the things that didn't add up. For a long time, that something was structurally different about how my parents felt about me. Not just the favoritism toward Marcus, which was real and consistent, but something underneath it. Something in the way my father looked past me at family gatherings. Not the way a person looks past someone they love. The way a person looks past something that reminds them of a fact they have spent decades deciding not to examine. I am not my father's biological daughter. I know that now. I did not know it with certainty until I did the test. A home kit, taken alone in my bathroom on a Tuesday morning 4 months before that final dinner party, sent off in its envelope and returned 3 weeks later as a PDF attached to an email with the subject line, "Your Ancestry DNA results." I went into it looking for the ethnicity breakdown. What I found instead, when I cross-referenced the results with the DNA database, was that I shared 0% of my autosomal DNA with the man listed as my father on my birth certificate. 0. Not a fraction, not an ambiguous number. 0. My biological father, whoever he was, whatever the circumstances, was not Robert Carver. I sat with that information for 4 months. I did not tell Daniel right away. I carried it in the way you carry something that hasn't finished becoming what it is yet. Turning it over, setting it down, picking it up again. I thought about my mother. I thought about what she had been carrying. I thought about why my father, Robert, the man with the reading glasses and the beard, had spent 35 years looking past me at the centerpiece candle. And something that had never made sense began to make a terrible, coherent, devastating kind of sense. He had always known, or suspected, or feared. The distance between us was not personality. It was not conflict aversion. It was a man who had married a woman who had been with someone else and produced a child who was not his, and who had decided, out of what combination of love and pride and fury and resignation I will never fully understand, to stay, to raise me as his daughter in front of the world, to never say the word out loud, and to spend 35 years making sure I understood, without ever telling me why, that I was not quite the same as Marcus, that there was a difference, that I was, somehow, slightly less. My mother had spent 35 years trying to erase a choice she made before I was born. The favoritism toward Marcus, the unequal gifts, the 11 Easter eggs, the party that was for the grandchildren, it was all in service of managing Robert's resentment. Keep Marcus in the center. Keep me at the edges. Make it seem like the natural order of things. Hope? I never asked why. The party for the grandchildren was the morning I stopped hoping. I made an appointment with a genetics counselor to walk through the results and confirm what I was reading. I gathered 3 months of bank statements showing the transfer history. I wrote a letter, not a long one, not an angry one, 12 sentences in total, and I folded all of it together into a manila envelope. I addressed it in my own handwriting. I put a stamp on it. I did not send it in the mail. I delivered it by hand, in person, on the morning of my parents' 37th anniversary party. The party they had been planning for 4 months. The one with 42 guests, the one where Sandra had made a slideshow of family photos, and Marcus had ordered a cake from the bakery my parents had loved since before I was born. I arrived at the house at 10 in the morning, 2 hours before the guests were due. My mother was in the kitchen in her good dress, cutting the stems off flowers for the centerpiece. She looked up when I came in. She said, "Oh, Amanda, you're early. Can you help me with the napkins?" Like it was any other day, like that dinner party had not happened, like my daughter in the yellow sweater did not exist. I put the envelope on the counter next to the flowers. I said, "Before everyone gets here, I need you to read this." She looked at the envelope. She looked at me. She picked it up. She opened the flap. I watched her read it. I watched her eyes move across the paper. I watched her face do what I described at the beginning. The color leaving from the forehead down, the hand going flat on the counter. She read the letter twice. She read the DNA report once. She looked up at me. She didn't say anything. I said, "I've canceled all the automatic transfers. The ones to the household account, the ones to the family celebration fund, the mortgage gap transfer, all of them. As of this morning, those are gone." I paused. "The party looks beautiful, Mom. I hope it goes well." I walked back to my car. I drove home. I sat in the driveway for about 3 minutes. Then I went inside. That was also the morning I opened the banking app and did what I had been slowly moving toward for 8 years. The automatic transfer to the Carver household support account, $950 a month, running for 4 years. Cancelled. The contribution to the Family Celebration Fund, $300 a month, running for 3 years. Cancelled. The utility support transfer, set up 2 years ago during a period when my parents said their fixed income wasn't covering the bills, $140 a month. Cancelled. The individual transfers I had still been making manually, the gap fills, the emergencies, the just this once requests that had become just every time, those I had stopped 3 weeks earlier, quietly, without announcement, as a kind of trial run to see if anyone noticed. No one called. No one asked if everything was okay, which was, in its own way, the final answer I needed. The total I had been transferring on a monthly recurring basis, $1,390 a month, canceled in under 2 minutes with 3 biometric confirmations and one final screen that said, "Recurring transfer has been deactivated. 5 years of obligation deconstructed with a fingerprint scan." There was something almost comic about how easy it was. Years of accumulated pressure, years of carefully worded requests framed as family duty, years of my mother's voice saying, "You know how it is, Amanda. Family helps family." And the whole architecture came down in the time it takes to make a cup of coffee. I closed the app. I put my phone on the kitchen counter. I made a cup of coffee. The house was quiet. Daniel was at work. Lily was at school. Outside, the October light was doing that thing it does in fall in Ohio, coming in low and golden through the window over the sink, hitting the coffee cup just right. I sat there and I thought, this is what it feels like when the internal argument stops. Not peace, exactly. Something harder than peace. Something more permanent. Daniel came home at 6 that evening and found me at the table with dinner already made, which was not unusual, and a look on my face that he recognized immediately as the look of someone who has made a decision and is now simply waiting for the world to catch up to it. He sat down across from me. He said, "Tell me." I told him everything. The DNA test, the counselor, the letter, the envelope, the bank transfers canceled that morning. I told him about the $31,000. I told him about the 11 Easter eggs. I told him what Lily had said in the car. He listened to all of it without interrupting, which is one of the things I love most about him. He is constitutionally incapable of interrupting someone who needs to finish a sentence. When I was done, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Are you okay?" I said, "Yes, I think so. In a way I haven't been in a long time." He nodded. He reached across the table and squeezed my hand once. He said, "Good." That was it. No speech, no analysis, no list of things I should have done differently or should watch out for now. Just good. He already knew about the financial contributions. We had talked about them before, argued about them a little, in the careful way two people who love each other talk about the places where their histories don't quite align. What he hadn't known was the DNA. He sat with that for another moment, then said, "Does this change how you feel about him? About Robert?" I thought about it honestly. "It changes how I understand him," I said. "I don't know yet if it changes how I feel." He nodded again. We ate dinner. Lily came down from her room at 7 and told us at length about a disagreement she had had at school about the correct pronunciation of Worcestershire sauce, and Daniel and I both had to work very hard not to laugh, and for 1 hour the evening was just an evening. Ordinary and warm and specifically ours, the three of us at the table with our food and our small daily dramas, and the October dark coming down outside the windows. I did not hear from my mother until the following morning. She called at 8:15. I had Lily out the door at 8 for school, and Daniel had already left, and the house was quiet. I let the phone ring once and watched her name on the screen, and I thought about the mother I had needed her to be, and the mother she had managed to be, and the distance between those two things. And then I answered. "Amanda." Her voice was strange. Not the tight, controlled voice she used for conflict, not the warm performance voice she used in public. Something flatter, something that sounded actually like a person who had been awake all night. "We need to talk." "Okay," I said. "I'm listening." There was a pause. Then, "How long have you known?" 4 months, I said. Another pause. Longer. "I was going to tell you, when the time was right." I kept my voice very level. "You had 35 years of right time, Mom." She made a sound I couldn't categorize. "Your father, Robert, He's very upset." "I imagine he is," I said. "The party. People are asking questions. Some of the guests saw my face when I read the letter, and Sandra noticed something was wrong. And now Marcus is—" "Mom," I said, and I kept my voice exactly where it was. "I'm not calling the transfers back. I want you to understand that clearly. That decision is made, and it isn't changing." I paused. "And I also want you to understand something else. What I sent you wasn't an attack. It was the truth. I deserved to know it. You chose not to give it to me. I found it myself." She didn't say anything. "Lily was at that table in her yellow sweater," I said. "She heard what you said." And I decided that night that I was done managing everyone else's comfort at the expense of hers. So I acted. I paused one more time. I hoped the party was nice. I ended the call. The silence afterward was the most complete I had ever felt. And for the first time in a long time, silence didn't feel like loneliness. It felt like space. The calls came in over the next 4 days, in waves so predictable I could have written the script in advance. The first wave was close family. My Aunt Patricia, my mother's older sister, who called to say she didn't know what had gotten into me, but that my mother was devastated, and that family was family regardless of circumstances. I told her that I agreed, and that was precisely why I had made the choices I made. She tried several more angles. I used one sentence each time. By the third angle, she ran out of script and said she hoped I would think about what I was doing to the family. I said I had thought about it for a very long time. I thanked her. I hung up. The second wave was Marcus. Marcus called on day 2, not to yell, but with that tone he has when he's been appointed ambassador against his will. Careful, reasonable, slightly pained. He said he understood I was upset, but that what I had sent Mom and Dad at the anniversary party had been unnecessarily public and dramatic. I asked him if he considered handing someone a sealed envelope in their kitchen 2 hours before their guests arrived to be public and dramatic. He said that wasn't the point. I asked what the point was. He said, "You can't just detonate something like that and walk away." I said, "Marcus, I transferred $31,000 to this family over 8 years. Your car was bought when you were 16. Mine was a bus pass. Your kids had 32 Easter eggs. Lily had 11. I'm not detonating anything. I'm stopping a subsidy." I waited. "And I am not my father's daughter. I have a right to know that." There was a very long silence. Then Marcus, in a quieter voice, "I didn't know about the DNA thing." "I know," I said. "I believe you." "I didn't know about the money either. Not all of it. I knew you helped sometimes, but I didn't know it was that much." "I know that too," I said. "I'm not angry at you, Marcus. I want you to understand that. You didn't build the system. You just lived in it." He didn't say anything for another moment. Then, "Is Lily okay?" That question from him in that voice. I wasn't expecting it, and it landed somewhere soft. "She will be," I said. "She's more resilient than she should have had to be." "That's fair," he said quietly. We didn't fix anything in that call, but it was different from the others, and I held on to that. The third wave was the distant relatives and family friends. People I hadn't spoken to in years, who had clearly been briefed on a version of events that cast me as someone who had lost her mind and punished her parents for no discernible reason. These calls I stopped answering after the first 2. I sent a single text to anyone who messaged. "I'm happy to discuss this calmly with anyone who wants to hear both sides. I'm not available for conversations that start from the assumption that I'm wrong." Most people didn't respond. A few did. Of those few, one, my mother's cousin Janet, who lived in Pittsburgh and had visited twice in my childhood, sent a text back that said, "I've seen your mother treat you differently for 30 years. I never said anything because it wasn't my place. I'm sorry I didn't. What you did took courage." I read that message 4 times. I didn't cry. I was past the crying phase of this particular story, had moved through it in the months after the DNA results arrived, but I felt something settle. Not validation exactly. More like confirmation that I had not been imagining any of it, that what I had cataloged in that school notebook at age 12 was real, that my daughter's 11 Easter eggs were real, that all of it had happened and I had not invented it to justify being difficult. There is a category of relief you can only feel when someone who had no stake in the matter looks at the thing clearly and says, "That wasn't right." It doesn't fix anything. It doesn't change anything. But it touches something that was bruised for a very long time, and the touch is careful, and it helps. On day 4, a letter arrived in the mail. Not from my mother or father, from the rental management company that handled the lease on Marcus and Sandra's house. My name was listed in the letter as the billing contact for a 60-day arrears balance on the lease. The amount was $2,840. There was a bolded line at the bottom that said, "Final notice. Legal action may follow." I stood at the kitchen counter with that letter, and I read it twice, and then I sat down because I needed to sit down. Not from distress, from the sheer structural audacity of it. My name on a lease I had never signed. My name on a debt I had never agreed to. $2,840 for an apartment I had never lived in. Billed to me because at some point I had been the reliable one, the one who paid, the one whose name you put on the form when you needed a backup who would actually come through. I called the rental company. The person who answered was a man who sounded tired in the specific way of someone who handles financial disputes all day, and has long since made peace with the absurdity of human beings. I explained in complete sentences that I was not a party to the lease, had never signed any document associated with the property, and that my name had been placed on their records without my knowledge or consent. I asked him to walk me through the authorization documentation they had on file for billing my name. There was a pause, some keyboard clicking. Then, "We have an email authorization from the primary leaseholder naming you as the emergency billing contact." "An email authorization naming me as the billing contact," I said, "not a signed lease addendum." "Correct." "Is an email authorization legally sufficient to create a financial obligation for a third party who did not send or sign that email?" Another pause. "No, it is not." "I thought so," I said. "I would like my name removed from the account entirely. I will follow up with a certified letter to that effect." He said he would flag the account for review. I thanked him. I hung up. I sat there for a moment, and I thought about how long that arrangement must have been in place. How many months or years my name had existed in that billing system as the backup, the failsafe, the person who would cover it if things went wrong. This is why they liked the arrangement. It required nothing from them except my continued willingness to be the one whose name you wrote down. I sent the certified letter that afternoon. I paid the notary fee at the UPS store. It was $14. It was the most satisfying $14 I had ever spent. They came to the house on a Saturday, 2 weeks after the anniversary party. I had been expecting something like this. Not exactly this, but something. My mother pulled into our driveway in her white Camry, and my father was in the passenger seat. And behind them came Marcus in his gray Subaru with Sandra and the kids. 6 people. Lily was upstairs in her room doing homework. Daniel was in the kitchen. I opened the door before my mother knocked. She had not been to our house in 11 months. She stood on the porch in her coat, and behind her my father with his hands in his pockets, and Marcus next to Sandra, and Tyler and Emma slightly behind Marcus. Not quite sure what they were doing there, which they weren't the first to not know. I stepped back and I said, "Tyler and Emma, you guys can go in the backyard. There's a basketball back there." They looked at Marcus, who nodded, and they went around the side of the house, and I was grateful for that they didn't have to stand there for what came next. "Come in," I said to the adults. We stood in the living room. Nobody sat down. This is one of the things I remember most clearly. The 6 of us standing in the living room like we were in a waiting room, like no one wanted to commit to the idea that this conversation was going to take long enough to justify sitting down. My mother started. She said she understood that I was angry. She understood that I had feelings about the DNA results. She understood that the financial situation had been unbalanced, and she was willing to acknowledge that. But what I had done, the way I had done it, at the anniversary party in front of people, was cruel. It was designed to humiliate. It was not the act of someone who wanted to resolve something. It was the act of someone who wanted to punish. I listened to all of it. I let her finish. Then I said, "Were you going to tell me?" She said she had been planning to find the right time. I said, "You've been finding the right time since before I was old enough to understand what you would have been telling me. You had 35 years of right time. You found 35 years of reasons not to use them. I found out because I paid for a DNA kit with my own money, because I needed to understand why the man I called my father spent my entire childhood looking past me. My father made a sound. He had not said anything yet. He made a sound like something had dropped inside him. He looked at the floor. "I'm not here to attack anyone," I said. "I'm here to tell you what changed. The transfers are gone. That's permanent. My name has been removed from Marcus's lease billing contact, which I did not authorize in the first place. Those are facts, not negotiations." I looked at my mother, and I need you to understand something about Lily. She was at that table in her yellow sweater. She heard what you said. She has been hearing the message of that sentence in smaller ways for her entire life, and I am done allowing that. Sandra said quietly, "What happened to the money?" She was not asking accusingly. She sounded genuinely uncertain, like someone who had only just calculated what the transfers had represented. I said, "It covered your mortgage gap last year, your car repair the year before, Tyler's birthday party, the family beach vacation that Lily and I didn't attend." I paused. I kept records. Marcus looked at the floor. Sandra put her hand over her mouth briefly. My father was still staring at the carpet. My mother said, "You don't treat us like a family. You treat us like an account." "Mom," I said, "I treated you like a family for $31,000 and 8 years. An account would have charged interest." She went very quiet. "You don't treat me like a daughter," I said. "You don't treat my daughter like a grandchild. And you still expected my money. That's the thing I can no longer do." Nobody said anything for a moment. Then Marcus, in a voice I hadn't heard from him before, not the ambassador voice, not the reasonable and slightly pained voice, said, "I didn't know it was that much, Amanda. I want you to know that. I didn't know." "I believe you," I said. "I really do." Sandra looked at him. Something passed between them that I wasn't meant to see, and I looked away. My father finally spoke. He said my name, just my name, Amanda, in a voice I hadn't heard from him since I was very small, before the distance had fully calcified. He said it like he was checking whether I was still there. I said, "I'm here." He didn't say anything else. He nodded once. He put his hands back in his pockets. I walked to the front door and opened it. Not slammed, opened. Slowly, quietly. My mother walked through it first. My father followed. Marcus paused at the threshold and turned back, and for a second I thought he was going to say something more. And then he didn't, and then he went through the door. Sandra touched my arm briefly as she passed. A light touch, nothing performed, just contact. I closed the door. Not a slam. A soft, complete click. I stood on the inside of it, and my hands were shaking. Not violently. A slight tremor, like something with a lot of stored energy finally being set down carefully. I breathed. After about 10 seconds, the trembling stopped. Daniel came out of the kitchen. He hadn't intervened. He had been there the whole time. Quietly. The way he is there for things. He didn't ask how it went. He looked at my hands, which had stopped shaking. He handed me a glass of water. I heard Lily's door open upstairs. Her footsteps on the stairs. Careful. She appeared at the bottom. Sleep-socked feet. Hair a little loose. Her homework notebook tucked under her arm. She looked at the front door. She looked at me. "Are we in trouble?" she said. I crouched down to her level. I put my hands on her arms, lightly. I said, "You are not in trouble. None of this is your fault. Not a single part of it. You didn't do anything wrong. You are not responsible for any of this." She looked at me with those dark eyes that calculate everything. "Are you in trouble?" "No," I said. "I am not in trouble. I made a choice, and I am standing in it, and we are safe." She thought about this. Then she said, "Okay," and leaned forward and put her forehead briefly against mine, the way she had done since she was 2 years old. Then she said, "Can we have pancakes for dinner?" Daniel said yes immediately from the kitchen before I could answer. She went to the kitchen. I stayed crouched by the door for another moment, and I thought about all the ways a child signals that a weight has been lifted. Not in one dramatic moment, not in a speech, but in small, ordinary things. Asking for pancakes, going back to their homework, humming softly, breathing at full capacity. She looked lighter, and I understood that was exactly why I had done all of it. 6 months later, the house was different. Not quieter. If anything, noisier, because the background frequency of dread that had lived in the walls for years had lifted, and the actual sound of us, the real noise of our actual daily life, could finally be heard at its proper volume. Lily had started humming again while she did her homework. I hadn't noticed that she had stopped until she started again. This soft, tuneless sound coming from her room in the evenings, a sound that meant she was concentrating and not afraid. Daniel noticed it on a Tuesday and looked at me over his coffee and raised his eyebrows, and I raised mine back, and we had an entire conversation without a word. The money I was no longer transferring meant things that were small, but that added up to something real. We replaced the refrigerator, which had been making a noise for 8 months that Daniel had been ignoring, because there was never quite enough margin to deal with it. We booked 3 nights at a lake cabin in Michigan for Lily's spring break, a trip I had been putting off for 2 years because it never seemed like the right time financially. And then I realized with something between laughter and fury that the cost of the cabin was almost exactly what I had been sending to the family celebration fund every 3 months. We went to Michigan. Lily waded in cold water up to her knees and screamed with laughter. Daniel took a photo of her that I now have as the wallpaper on my phone. I still received the occasional message from extended family. People testing whether I had cooled down, whether the situation had resolved itself, whether I was ready to be the reliable one again. I responded to these with a single sentence or not at all, and the messages gradually slowed and then mostly stopped. The ones that didn't stop were the ones I was glad to keep getting. Marcus, who texted periodically in a way that felt different, more careful, more honest. He didn't ask for anything. He would send a photo of Tyler's soccer game, or ask how Lily was doing in school, or once, late on a Thursday evening, just, "I've been thinking about the Easter eggs. I'm sorry I didn't say anything." I wrote back, "I know. I believe you." And I did. And then there was the call I wasn't expecting, 8 months after the anniversary party. It was Sandra, not Marcus. Sandra, calling from her own phone on a Saturday afternoon while I could hear the kids in the background. She asked if I had a few minutes. I said I did. She said, "I want to tell you something, and I'm going to ask you not to hold it against Marcus because he doesn't know I'm calling." I said, "Okay." She said, "We're covering the mortgage ourselves now, both of us." Marcus picked up a second client, and I went back to the part-time position at the school. It's tight, but it's ours. A pause. "I wanted you to know we could have done it before. I think I knew that. I just didn't push for it. Because the situation was comfortable for us, and I'm sorry." I sat with that for a second. "I appreciate you saying that," I said. "I really do." "Is Lily okay?" she said. "She's good," I said. "She's really good." "Tyler asked about her last week," Sandra said. "He wants to know if she wants to come to his soccer game sometime." I felt something uncurl a little in my chest. "I'll ask her," I said. We talked for another 10 minutes. Not about the big things, but about the small ones. The way people talk when they are carefully rebuilding something that was damaged and are trying to use better materials than what they used before. When I hung up, Daniel was in the doorway. He said, "How do you feel?" I thought about it honestly. "Steady," I said. "There is a conversation I need to tell you about, because it is the one I least expected and the one that changed the most." It was 9 months after the anniversary party. I had been picking up something I left at my parents' house, a box of my grandmother's old photos I had asked to borrow months before and finally gone to retrieve. My mother was out. My father was in the garage, doing the thing he does in the garage on weekends, which is mostly sorting things that don't need sorting and moving things to other places in the garage where they will also not need sorting. I found him there with a box of old tools and a cup of coffee that had clearly gone cold. He looked up when I came in. We hadn't spoken alone, the two of us, just us, since before the anniversary party. He looked older than I remembered. Not ancient, just more of whatever he had always been. He said, "You want some coffee? There's fresh inside." I said, "Okay." I went in and poured myself a cup and came back and sat on the old workbench that has been in that garage since I was a child. He kept sorting his tools. Neither of us said anything for a moment, which was fine. We had always been able to do that, actually, the two of us. Whatever else was broken between us, silence had never been uncomfortable. He picked up an old wrench and looked at it like he was trying to remember where it came from. Then he said, "My father did something like this. To my older brother." He didn't look at me. He had a reason for it. Thought he did anyway. My brother was from my mother's first marriage, died before I was born. My father knew it and spent 30 years acting like he didn't. He set the wrench down. I watched my brother adjust to that, his whole life, and I swore to myself I wouldn't do that to anyone. He stopped talking. He picked up a different tool. "And then I did it anyway," he said. Quietly. Not a confession, a fact, stated with the flatness of someone who has been sitting with a fact for a very long time. I didn't say anything for a moment. The garage was quiet, except for the distant sound of a lawnmower somewhere down the street. "I believe you," I said, "that you didn't want to. I believe that completely." I paused. "It happened anyway." He nodded. He still wasn't looking at me. "I know." "It happened to Lily too," I said, not as an accusation, just as a fact that needed to be in the room. He set down whatever he was holding. He put his hands flat on the workbench. His jaw moved. "I know that too," he said. "What are you going to do about that?" I asked. He looked up at me then. Full eye contact. The first time in longer than I could calculate. He said, "I called someone, a therapist. I've been going for 2 months." I hadn't known that. My mother hadn't mentioned it. Marcus hadn't mentioned it. He had done it quietly, without announcement, the way he did most things. Only this time the thing he had done quietly was not a retreat. It was a step toward. "Good," I said, and I meant it. We sat in the garage for another 20 minutes and talked about the tools and the photos and a small thing that needed fixing on the porch railing, and when I left, I took my box of my grandmother's photos and I put them in the trunk of my car, and I sat in the driveway for a moment with the box back there and my father still in the garage and the October light doing what it does. The family wasn't fixed. I want to be honest about that. It wasn't a grand reconciliation. My mother and I were still navigating something that had no easy road through it. Robert, my father, was in therapy and had made one real step forward, and that mattered without being a solution. Marcus and Sandra were paying their own mortgage, and that mattered too. But the thing that had been the foundation of everything, the comfortable asymmetry, the subsidy, the unspoken agreement that I would be reliable and get less and smile at the dinner table and teach my daughter to fold her hands in her lap, that was gone. Removed cleanly, like a load-bearing wall that turned out not to be load-bearing after all. The house was still standing. It was just different now. Rearranged. More honestly structured. The way a bone is different after it breaks and sets. Stronger at the fracture, aching when it rains. I want to talk to you for a minute. Not about my family anymore. About yours. About you if you grew up being the one who got less. Maybe it was the bedroom. The smaller one. The one facing the alley instead of the backyard. The one that was painted once and never again, while your siblings' room got a new color every couple of years because they needed a change. Maybe it was the birthday. The grocery store cake with the plastic flowers, while the other one got a party at the venue with the DJ and the photo booth. Maybe it was something your parents said so often and so casually that you eventually absorbed it as a fact about yourself. You've always been so easy. You've never needed much. You're the strong one. You'll be fine. I need you to hear something about that. You weren't hard to love. You were easy to overlook. And those are not the same thing. Being easy to manage is not the same as needing less. Being quiet about your pain is not the same as not having any. Learning to fold your hands in your lap and wait for the moment to pass is not the same as being okay with it. You adapted because you had to. You smiled at the dinner table because you understood, very early, that your disappointment was a problem no one was going to solve for you, and making a scene would only create a new problem on top of it. You were practical. You were perceptive. You were honestly braver than most adults in that room. None of that means you deserved less. none of that means you were less. I know that somewhere in your story there is a person who saw you when no one else was looking. A grandmother who pressed money into your hand when your mother wasn't watching. A teacher who stayed after class to tell you that you were good at something. A neighbor who remembered your birthday when the people whose job it was to remember forgot. Hold on to that person. Not as evidence that the system wasn't as bad as it was exactly as bad as it was. Hold on to them as evidence that you were always worth seeing. Someone saw. That matters. I am Amanda Carver. I grew up learning the bus routes while my brother got a car with a red bow on the hood. I kept a notebook of evidence starting at age 12 because some part of me knew, before I had words for it, that the truth about my own life was worth documenting. I sent a manila envelope to my parents on their 37th anniversary, and I watched my mother go pale, and I drove home, and I canceled every automatic transfer, and I made pancakes for dinner, and I took my daughter to Michigan in the spring, and she waded in cold water up to her knees and screamed with laughter. I am not angry anymore. I am not healed in a simple, clean way either. I am somewhere more honest than both of those things. I know what happened. I acted on what I knew, and I am building a life that reflects what I actually believe I am worth, which turns out to be considerably more than a bus pass. There is a rule now for conversations with my parents. It is simple. If the conversation moves toward the old patterns, the comparisons, the explanations, the "you've always been so easy," I say the sentence and I end the call. The sentence is, "I'm going to hang up now, and I'd like to talk again when we can talk differently." My mother tested it 3 weeks into the new arrangement. I said the sentence. I hung up. She called back 8 minutes later. The conversation was different, shorter, more careful, more honest. Not perfect. I don't expect perfect. I expect different. It's not a perfect family. It's a different one. And different after 35 years of the same is enough. I keep the bus pass in the top drawer of my desk at home. The plastic is a little yellowed now. It's been 15 years since that August birthday, and the number on it is barely readable. I keep it not as evidence of what was done to me, but as a reminder of who was doing things despite it. There was a girl who got up at 5:45 in the morning in the January dark and stood on the corner of Maple and Vine with her catalog notebook in her backpack and her $60 bus pass in her wallet and her plans that nobody had made for her because nobody was going to. That girl built the house on Sycamore Street. She built the savings account and the 3 nights in Michigan and the pancake dinners and the daughter who hums while she does her homework. She built all of it with her own hands and her own money and her own stubborn refusal to adjust her expectations down to match what other people thought she deserved. I sat in the car in the parking lot of Lily's school last week, waiting for pickup, with the bus pass in my jacket pocket where I'd put it that morning for no clear reason. Sometimes I just carry it. The October light was coming through the windshield at that low fall angle. Lily came out through the double doors in her yellow sweater. Not the same one from that dinner, a new one, same yellow, different buttons. And she saw my car and ran. Not because she was in a hurry, just because she was happy to see me. She got in and dropped her backpack on the floor and said something immediately about a project on weather systems. And did I know that the word hurricane comes from a Taino word, and the Taino were indigenous people of the Caribbean, and that's actually really important context. I said I did not know that. She said it was important context. I started the car. She kept talking. Outside, the light was exactly right. The way it gets in October in Ohio, golden and a little sad and very clear. I thought about what I would say to the girl at the bus stop at 5:45 in the morning in January. The one with the notebook and the $60 and the plans she was building entirely alone. I would say she is going to hum while she does her homework. And that is going to be everything. If you grew up as the child who got less celebration, less resources, less of the kind of love that shows up in the practical world, in the things that get documented and driven and bowed with red ribbon, your like on this video is how you tell me you know exactly what that table felt like. Not the abstract version, the specific one, the fork, the candle, the yellow sweater, the 6 words. I read the comments. I want to know your story. Tell me, did you stay in contact? Did you cut it off? Did you find something in between that actually worked? What was your version of the Easter eggs? What was the thing someone said casually in the tone of a parking ticket that you are still carrying 15 years later? Subscribe if you want to hear what happened at Christmas. Because my mother made a decision at Christmas that I did not see coming, and it changed something. Not everything, but something real, something that matters. And I want to be able to tell you about it when it's time. That story is still becoming itself. I'm still inside it. And if you've been with me this far, you already know that's the best reason to stay. She said it in the same flat voice she uses for parking tickets and laundry detergent. The party is for the grandchildren. But my daughter was at that table in her yellow sweater, and I had been keeping the notebook for 23 years, and I knew exactly where the envelope was.